in your years doing this job, you must have witnessed lots of supernatural events, maybe even demons. But what was it that first convinced you of the need for this ministry, that the supernatural was real and that Christ was the answer?
Well, it sort of does go back to what I said in the first question, that when you experienced it yourself in your own house and other people had experienced it, then it's really a matter of what's true and what isn't. And I remember once at the beginning of this whole process, so what I want to get to is truth. So truth is a third party, and you hear people talk about, well, you have your truths and I have mine. No, that's not possible. Truth is a third party that we may try and ascertain to what it is, and in discovering it have a satisfaction and a unity with the truth. But we can't change the truth about something. So either there was a virgin birth or there wasn't. And you and I could disagree about it or agree about it, and it would have still no bearing on whether it happened or not. So what I believe and want to believe doesn't make something true. But if I am truly independent and objective, or as far as I can be as a human being, there's a whole question mark over that as well. But as far as I can be honest, I didn't want this, I wasn't pursuing this, though you could argue we all want to pursue meaning, and a life full of meaning is much better than a life full of just happiness. That's empty, unless of course you think you only live for this life, in which case fill your boots. But I think a lot of us know we don't. So it's the pursuit of truth that really has to drive you. What is actually the truth? And so when I experience something outside of my body, and then somebody else does simultaneously or at a later date that is a third party to me, then we have something that is now beginning to build an understanding of what is true or not. So we will often discard things historically because there isn't video evidence or photographic evidence as not being true because we haven't experienced it ourselves. This is that famous little quip about the great ruler from the East who didn't believe in ice because he'd never seen it, because he lived in a very hot area where water never froze and the temperature never got down to zero. So he just didn't believe that water could become a solid, until of course he was moved somewhere else and maybe found it. So do we believe in the authenticity or the integrity of third parties? And so I think it was, I can't remember the guy's name, the Scottish presenter who did Coast, and talked about how many people he met who'd had experiences of the supernatural, of ghosts. And he said, and he was very wise I think in saying this, and I have no reason to doubt them because they had no reason to lie. And I was talking, it's funny how often I'll talk about these kind of things to people and suddenly they'll come out with their own story. In fact, I had a guy who was actually served in the Falklands War, who I talked about this. He asked me what I did, and on the third occasion, because usually my rule was I won't tell people what I do unless they ask me. This guy asked me once or twice or even three times, and I was thinking, why does he keep asking me the same question and then totally ignoring what I'm saying? And then in the end, this brave soldier told me about how he encountered a ghost, as other people had in the barracks near Port Stanley on the Falklands, and couldn't deny that this very big bearded man tried to get into bed with him, and he didn't exist. Nobody else had seen him, and then he disappeared. It's quite disturbing for him, and I come across this a lot. We've got to be open to what's true. So to begin with, I tried to deny these things because I didn't want to believe them, and I thought to be scientific and rational meant to deny it. But that's not the case, is it? Really, objectivity means that I should be open to believe something with the right evidence and third-party verification, regardless of whether I want it to be true or not. But this is a bigger question about ourselves even, isn't it? What's the truth about me? Who am I really? And we all will tend to actually have a self-appraisal that may be negative or positive, but is often inaccurate about who we really are, often framed in childhood. I will often consider myself to be overlooked or not important and lacking any kind of presence or influence over anybody, because of that's how it was during my days at public school. But those are framed by things that aren't actually the case. So your question, so I've rambled on so much. What was your question again? I've sort of forgotten the question.
What was it that first convinced you that the supernatural was real and that and that demons were real and that Christ was the actual answer?
Yes, well, thank you for reminding me. So first-hand experience made a big difference to that, and then first-hand experience corroborated through third parties meant I knew these things were real. The demonic is quite a scary thing, really, because having a haunted house, and this is where a lot of people talk about deliverance or this kind of work, to go around a haunted house, buildings don't bother me. As a homeless man once said to me, he said, "Oh, I sleep in graveyards." And somebody who was next to me went, "Oh gosh, how scary." He goes, "No, it's not the dead that's scary me, it's the living." And he had a point. People are scary, houses aren't. Dead people can be scary if they're still roaming the earth. But I knew the point he was making. So demons, somebody who's actually influenced by an evil spirit, and it sounds medieval and archaic, doesn't it? Well, it isn't. It's just part of who we are. And once you accept and realise that the soul exists and can persist after the demise of the flesh, of the body, and so many people in the UK acknowledge or realise or believe that ghosts exist. I think the last survey, though it is some time ago, it was over 50% of people believed in ghosts. Well, that's over half the population that knows that the spirit persists after the death of the body. Well, actually, if you're going to be logical and rational, then we need to pause. We need to stop. If that's the case, I need to give this some consideration, because I may think the lights go out when I die, and that's the end of it. But if it isn't, and if I have experience of the supernatural, or the persistence and the survival of the soul over the body, then I really must consider what is the nature of that reality, and what is the gateway to it, and what does it mean if I get stuck? Is there a heaven and a hell? These are the kind of things that if you keep the music on and the television on, and we're surrounded by screens all the time, and you see people barely able to communicate now because they're constantly staring at a screen like this one, then actually you've got to ask yourself, what are the fundamental things I should be considering here in terms of who I am and what happens to me in death? Because death is an absolute given. The last part of your question, so it's reality, the verification of third parties, and actually seeing a demon take somebody's body over was one of the scariest things I've seen. And it doesn't happen that often. There's a lot of people, I believe, that were influenced by spirits, but very few where the spirit has got such a control of the person, it can physically manipulate them. And we did see that. I wasn't the only one. There was 8 people in our chapel, in the house, and a particular woman who had been into some rather dark things. We were preaching, I was preaching, and this thing took over her body. She was dragged off the sofa by something that was not there. Came across the floor, her head hit the floor, and I'll never forget the noise of her head hitting this wooden floor. And then she converted and span on the floor in front of us. I prayed once I'd managed to gather my wits, because when something breaks the laws of physics, when you see something that is like an optical illusion and it's happening before you, your brain struggles to catch up with what's going on. So this woman was pulled off the sofa. She just fell down, she lay there as if she was unconscious, and then was pulled off it by something that we couldn't see. So it broke the laws of physics, and at first you're looking at it thinking, what has just happened? But something very, very difficult did happen. And her head hitting the floor was a scary noise as it hit there. And it didn't wake her up. She just spun there on the floor. And we all saw it, and we all knew that it was supernatural and it was demonic. We even had doors banging in the house. It was a pretty disturbing time, but that was a game changer, and that was early on, and it meant that yes, people can be demonized. But typically, Satan doesn't want people to see that. As Jesus approaches people who are demonized and they erupt in a manifestation, or the boy's thrown to the floor foaming at the mouth, this isn't what Satan wants. This isn't what demons want. They don't want to be discovered. It's very much an occult, a hidden, a clandestine world, where when it's manifest and exposed, then it can be dealt with. Like any illness or a problem with your car, it needs to get bad enough to be diagnosed. So when somebody manifests in that physical way in front of others that can help, it means it's really the beginning of the end for the possession, as long as the person is willing to find out and repent and turn away from the thing that led to it in the first place. So there's a whole different area of conversation there. But finally, Christ. Yeah, Jesus Christ is the only tool in my box. He actually was the Son of God. That's what I truly believe. And it is at his name that every knee must bow. Oh, there's lots of other things that can manipulate this realm. I've even seen mock exorcisms where it appears another force, being or deity achieved this, only for it to come back again. So yes, Jesus Christ, I thoroughly and totally believe in Christ and who he is and who he was. And yes, that's the only tool in my box. He was God, and he died to overcome such things as these.